Stay tuned for our future events in the spring. We plan at least one student-led academic panel, at least one museum excursion, something related to Asian arts. One more invited speaker and at least one edifying film screening, and that's a secret that I won't say too much about. It's a foreign film, and we have a copy by special arrangement, so please sign up for details on our VIP secret studies and activities. I want to thank John for doing video, and a very, very warm thanks to Tiffany, PhD student in social and cultural anthropology, who oversees all the student union groups and has been very helpful with logistics making this come together. In envisioning a season opener for our group, I could scarcely imagine a more ideal fit for our first talk than Dr. Purushottama Bilimoria. Dr. Bilimoria is Distinguished Teaching and Research Fellow at what I hope will prove to be, in time, a sister organization to our own, the Mira and Ajay Shingal Center for Dharma Studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And if I'm not mistaken, I see some new faces here. So those of you visiting our campus, welcome as well. I would say Dr. Bilimoria fits one mission of our group. He's in very much one who works adroitly and naturally between disciplines, as you will see some of tonight. He's also an international presence in the academy, having taught on a number of continents. What is it, 3 continents, or is it 4 now? 4, okay, very good. He is the editor-in-chief of the journal Sophia and has co-edited or edited a number of volumes for Routledge, DK Print World, and other renowned publishers. Just to name some recent titles of note, excellent titles these. History of Indian Philosophy for Routledge History of World Philosophy series. Emotions in Indian Thought Systems. Indian Diaspora, Hindus, and Sikhs in Australia. And Post-Colonial Reason and It Critiques Deliberations on Spivak's Thoughts. Our own Debashish Banerjee has very graciously offered to make a response just after the talk before we open things up for questions. Dr. Bilimoria, I look forward to hearing your talk entitled Grief, Empathy, and the Dharmic Aesthetic Imaginary. Everyone please join me in welcoming back to CIS, Dr. Bilimoria.
Thank you, and I thank Sean for organizing this and Debashish Banerjee for encouraging me to take this task on. This is, in a way, a long ongoing conversation as well between me and my brother Debashish, and we'll continue that conversation here. In fact, I've drawn on his work, as you'll see a little later, when I was searching for some foundations for what I was developing as Tagore's Aesthetics of Emotions, Grief and Empathy. All right, so I'll dive right into it because I have sort of a longish paper which I've cut short for the purposes of getting through. So the first thing that I want to talk about in this context are things that come from Natya Shastra, which is the Bharat's Natya Shastra, is a very, very old text on dance, but particularly the emotions involved in that and the gestures and movements and the symbolic meaning of all that. The main theory that comes out of that is this theory of bhavas and rasa, rasa is developed later on by a number of different aestheticians like Abhinavgupta and so on, but it does get a mention here as well. So while he's dealing with bhavas, the basic emotions, the emotions also have their counterpart in the rasika, well, in the audience, if you like. So if the theatrical performer, the performer, is exhibiting an emotion of love, then what might arise in the audience is erotic love, Sringara. So that's what the dialectic really is in a way. So, you know, or how one would understand. Jim, my guru. Wow, wonderful. Very good. Yes. Great honor to have you around here. So I started with Bharata's Natya Shastra, as I say. But the main one that I want to really talk about is shoka, which was called lapa, the emotion of sorrow, grief, lamentation, and the corresponding emotion which the audience, the listener, or the person seeing would have in them, would arise naturally in them, and that's one of compassion and empathy. Of course, they will feel the sorrow as well, so you could, there could be tears in the eyes too, but it would be accompanied, according to Bharata and according to this theatrical repertoire, with compassion and empathy. And then there are other ones, crowd, anger, irritation, energy, excitement, musing, pain, terror, fright, which could evoke the taste or the feeling, the rasa. So rasa would mean taste, but it could also mean relish as well. And some people would just translate it as emotion, which is fine also, because that's what one is feeling. Or just feeling sometimes. People will say it's the feeling that one has, the feeling of the same, the terror, fright. And then there will be disgust, and that might have the response on the viewer of shame or outrage, and then vismaya or astonishment, and that would have the response of arresting or being incredulous. So the one that I really want to focus on, the particular emotion here, is grief. And I'm not absolutely sure that grief need necessarily lead just to compassion and empathy. It could lead to a combination of the other rasas as well. That's something that I want to say and develop, partly because this theory came about. This theory that sort of came about because there were the early Shastrakaras, the early commentators, the writers and commentators were focusing far too much on the joyful, the sort of positive, if you like, positive emotions, not too much of the negative emotions. And there were, in theater you need to have a combination of things rather than focusing on one, unlike, say, perhaps Shakespeare did much later on. And so the classical Indian aestheticians, and I won't name all of them, but as Abhinav Gupta I mentioned, and Anandavardhana as well, have been of the opinion that the power of rasa inheres most expressively in dance, play, and poetics. And there is a Indian a writer, a contemporary one, who has averred that rasa theory is exclusive to the literary arts or poetry in general, but not so much in non-representational media of music or painting, where emotions are vague and abstract. Right? I mean, what a statement to make. This really is worrying assertion, I'd say, and is an uncritical adoption of classicism that fails to countenance the enormous amount of work that has gone into not just music, but in painting, in the work of art. Right? And so my argument is basically that apart from the model of theater, the dramatization on the stage, one could look outside of the theater for expressive work in aesthetic works where these emotions are captured, what I call the dark emotions or negative emotions. Right. So I want to move. I mean, there's a lot of theoretical material which I have to really, for want of time, not go into. But I'll do more by illustration than by textual argument here for the time being. And now for some pragmatic illustration from the battlefield scene in the Mahabharata. So I'm just going to go straight jump into the slides and talk mostly from there. So this, as everybody knows, is the battlefield scene that the Bhagavad Gita begins with, one of the books of the Mahabharata, where moments before the assault is launched, the warrior Arjuna is overcome with despondency, vishada. He says, I'm hopelessly smitten by this negative feeling that's coming over me, or why should I fight? Should I fight? But what's interesting is not just the intellectual or the evaluative proposition that he's making, is also how he's feeling, what he's exuding, what's coming across to Krishna. And of course, whoever is reporting this, he says, he lets down the powerful bow from his hands. His half-muted request to break on the wheels takes Krishna, his charioteer friend, by surprise. Arjuna is palpably troubled by something, and his judgment appears to be hazing over. There are more components to it than his regular cognitive person would indicate. It is a matter of his mood. His inner sense is thrown into a state of confusion, panic, and deep pity. His limbs have become weak, mouth dry, body trembling, hair standing on end, and skin erupting in burning sensation. He confesses that the once cherished desire for conquest and allying conviction appears shaky. He wonders aloud whether there is any joy at the end of this bloody journey, or even in living. Expressing a deep fear for death of his kinsfolk at his own hands, he says to Krishna, therefore there is no justification in killing our own kinsfolk. Now, what I do in this particular article, which I've also written elsewhere, is that Arjuna is actually making an argument not from just a cognitive, rational, evaluation of the Kantian kind of, categories and so on. He's making this judgment from the emotions that are rising in his body. That's what's informing him, and the pity that arises, the sort of even compassion that arises for, look, these are all our uncles and grandfathers, some of the granduncles and their children and cousins and so forth, nephews. How can we kill them? There are obviously cousins already. The cousins are fighting, so they're all related. So it's kinsfolk, the same blood. That's what he's feeling, and that's what's coming up. But that's not a very rational thing to say in this context. Krishna turns around and says, "Well, what about your caste duty? What about the maxims? The principles of ethics and morality and dharma and so forth. That's what should prevail, not how you're feeling inside, right? Mm-hmm. That's the line in which the conversation goes. So, and Krishna actually sort of looks at him with a smirk and so forth, and Arjuna just puts his head down and says, "Well, you tell me, what should I be thinking? What should I be feeling?" That's what he's asking. What should I really be feeling in these situations? Arjuna's objections to the engaging in war appear to be based on well thought out and firm ethical grounds, but when he sets out to articulate the inspired thought intelligently, his arguments emerge as being scarcely coherent, and appeal to his own conscience is minimally illuminating. But his concerns, and so this is where I say ethics is not evaluative in this sense. It's actually almost informed by sensations, informed by feelings, that's informed by emotions and so on. So I go against a particular trend which I'll come to towards the end, why I'm developing a very different basis for moral judgment. So the politics and polemical diatribe on dharma, yoga, freedom, death, and transcendental discourse that follow in the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna is not really my concern here. What I want to do is to get a handle on how we understand Arjuna's overwrought melancholy, or for that matter, in the broader canvas of the Mahabharata, which I can turn to. So grief has struck the Pandavas. So this is the bit about Arjuna's Vishada and the grief there too. And you can see a little bit on his face, and Krishna is saying, "Yeah, big deal, what are you on about?" the basic Americanism there. Okay. So grief had struck the Pandavas when tricked into the game of dice by the arch-rival Duryodhana, that's the leader of the opposing cousin clan, which they lost in a certain sleight of hand. So here, the Arjuna's group, the Pandavas, they lose a game of dice, which they're challenged to by the opposing clan, part of the clan. And eventually they lose. The last thing that he has that he can bet on is the wife. Arjuna's wife, which he shares, of course, with 5 brothers. So it's an array that I don't know what you call it, a sort of polygamous relationship. But anyway, they lose Draupadi, and Draupadi goes into a grief of her own as a result of this. Not only that, but when they've been sent to exile, when they're marching through the exile, you can see a lot of grief on the face of the people going on exile. But it is said that the entire kingdom, the city of elephants, Hastinapura, is said to have been smitten by inconsolable grief. And a wise Brahmin, Shonaka, steeped in the ontology of Sankhya Yoga, trying to understand this moment, helps Yudhishthira, his elder brother, understand this moment of grief in the postpartum self-exile condition that they're afflicted with. And his theory is very based from Sankhya, which is where the body is a very, very important part. And all the senses have tanmatras, they have subtle parts, they have subtle and more subtle elements and so forth. And he traces emotions right through those subtle elements there. So your reaction is not just outwardly, which is what Arjuna didn't understand. He was trying to say to Krishna, tell me where is it coming from? How far deep is it gone? So anybody who's had sort of, very close member of a family who's gone, who's died, and especially at an early age, and they're overcome with grief and melancholy, they know the physiological reaction is a very strong one, and they can't pin it down where it comes from. And how far deep does it go? And in fact, it goes very deep. And that's the interesting part. So it's interesting to note that the bodily perturbations are linked directly to mental anguish as the basis of grief, and that relief from grief involves calming the body through all kinds of therapies. Talk therapy, of course, as we know in our modern times, but in the traditional times it was through herbal, sometimes letting out blood, and various other ways, or penance, or going on pilgrimage and so forth. There's a whole variety of things that people are asked to do to overcome grief. It's not a matter of staying home for 3 days and then going to work. It just doesn't work that way. There's a lot more involved because it's very subtle. Okay. So and for this reason, even some of the modern sort of therapists who have some idea of Buddhist or Hindu yoga and so forth will dispense a whole regime of meditation, chanting, and so on. Right? Okay. So now so what I want to do is next to move. Just go through 1 or 2 little bits here. There is also another grief that happens, a grief scene in the Mahabharata, when the grand teacher, Bhishma, when the grand teacher is seen lying on the bed of nails, but he's not dying. I mean, he's dying, but he's not really going. And it's taking a long time, so they don't really know how to deal with the emotion that they have, whether they should be lamenting now, or whether there's a state of confusion. They're trying to sort this through, which is very, very interesting. But the part that I really want to get to is towards the end, when just when the battle is about to begin, and then the battle begins and so on. And there is grief just about in every passage. It's really quite remarkable. And the part that I focus on is the one called Stri Parva, the Book of Women, after the carnage in the dead of night. So just before the carnage, you have Kunti, whose son is taking leave, and she's just bursting out because she knows that she won't see him again. Arjuna, his son is killed, and he is really distraught. I mean, it's just what he has to express in that moment is really pretty heart-wrenching. And this is actually a contemporary painting which I thought captured it very well. It's very beautiful. I don't know the author or the artist. And there's another one where Gandhari is overcome with grief at the death of Karna, her son, and she's blind, she's not able to see, but at least she's able to hold death in her hand. And then there is Kunti's desolation. This is the scene that I want to now describe. So the suggestive passages, as I say, are from here. In this passage, there is definitely here an account of deeply moving mood of grief, the grief of failure. This failure, of course, as you can see, that they've lost. What happened? How did we lose the battle? How did both sides lose the battle? Because nobody won in this, it was carnage through and through. Of the lost status and of the dire loss of loved ones, the grief that the women have been overcome with is so palpable that it is difficult to express except through imagining the grief of others and grieving on another's account. The moving instance of this is Gandhari's expression of grief to Krishna, in which he surveys the blighted battlefield with divinely given sight or extraordinary intuition. And it's whether it's Kunti or whether it's Gandhari, it doesn't really matter. They both have a almost similar reaction to what's going on. The description she paints of the innocent wives of the deceased warriors confronted by the mangled corpses of their men is a masterpiece of horror and pathos. I'm citing somebody. Anyway, Amar Fati. The warriors' former invincibility is juxtaposed with the women, the Panchalas and the Kuru alike, reminiscing the virtues and the joys they had with their now lifeless husbands, being mauled by the hungry vultures, hyenas, dogs and goblins in an act of total annihilation of the hitherto virility, the macho maleness and the identity. Here is one of the women, and this is just the translation I gave. That was my man. Okay, I think you can get it out from this picture itself. So there is a man lying there. That was my man. Grief robbed them, the man, of their demeanor. At the sight of the draped corpses of Karna, Abhimanyu, Drona, Dropada, Jadaratha, and so on, Duryodhana among others, tigers of men snuffed out like fading flames, most by Bhima's missiles, lie in maces still in their hands as if raised boastfully towards their beloved woman. So you see the symbolism here, that the maces which was out there killing yesterday, but last night it was next to them when they were making love and so on, and that mace, like an impotent part of the body, is now lying there. So this is the symbolism is so strong, so strong. Now, what's happened to them? Where is their virility? What's happened? This is dropped. The whole body is dropped. It's wood. It's like wood. Jackals are coming, and hyenas and jackals are coming and eating. So, and then the woman would say, the matriarch, the head of the clan of the women, said, "Look at the array of widows, bewildered daughters-in-law, newly betrothed brides running hither and thither with their braided hair down, soaking in the blood of their loved ones, some also looking for the heads severed from their now wooded bodies of their fallen husbands. The jackals are out in the daylight, indifferent to this human noise, knowing at every limb which only a few moon nights before limbs which only a few nights before were in deep conjugal embrace, triggered many a pleasurable sensation to their beloved now distraught wives, screeching to the winds, how could this be, this beautiful slaughter? Whose dharma, whose justice?" So this is very, very moving passages from the Mahabharata. So there, as Robert Solomon rightly observed, deeply reflective and dedicatory qualities of grief, meaning that the surge of feelings, sensations, and emotions is marked by a deep sense of care, gratitude, reverence, honoring, dedicating, commemorating, reciprocating, celebrating, but also lamenting, counting the losses, and saying, but there still remains this unrequited longing, a resilient desire for it to be otherwise than the loss so deeply felt. So this is really really wonderful, and then I go in and describe just about every emotion through the other secondary emotions and all the things that are happening. Towards the end, there's also another part where the animals lament as well, because Krishna and Arjuna sort of end up at a forest, Kandava forest, and they set it to fire. And there's no reason given as to why they do that. Playful, they were playing and so forth, but what happens is the 5 animals survive, and they come out and they express their grief. They say, this is horrendous. Why would somebody do that? Doesn't know that our species actually are sentient and enjoys some of these. Some of the first sort of ruminations of animal liberation happening here. And so the lament of the 5 animals. And I think Krishna should have known that animals also have feelings, they have emotions, they feel grief. Here is amazingly a dog, my dog called Rasa. This is Rasa, telling me that her Rasa is of grief as her mother is being put to sleep. Her mother is being put to sleep, and Rasa just out of this world. And I captured that, so it was quite amazing. And of course, similarly with the grief, here is Arjuna's dog, Yudhishthira's dog, also expressing grief, because Indra said, as this guy is ascending to heaven, he doesn't want to go through the crowning ceremony. What do you call the enthronement and so forth? When they put you on the throne, the coronation, yeah. And it doesn't turn up for the Ashwamedha, the horse sacrifice that precedes that either. He says, what did we win? I mean, a piece of land? I mean, but look what we lost, our entire kingdom, our entire clan. I don't want this piece of land, for kingdom, for territory. So he decides to ascend to heaven and wants to take his dog, and they say dogs are not allowed, no dogs allowed. Right? And I was just, it took a little while, but then the dog sort of came out and said, but I'm Dharma, so I'm the law itself, so the dog was allowed. So now here, before I get to the Tagore bit, I'm giving it away, but you can see, I did say that this is Tagore, but I picked these 2 up before I go on to his other paintings, because I think they represent exactly just what I have described from the Mahabharata. I mean, you can see him capturing the women looking down, lamenting and saying, but that was my man, where is he gone? How am I going to live now for the rest of my days? And here is the vanity of victory. Oh yes, we won, but you can see the stolid hand of the great, what did we win really? I mean, where is it? And here is nature as a way of expressing. I mean, I thought it was pretty accidental, but I had no idea who came in. So this was a dead tree, but whether this was from the ocean or somebody actually came and put those seaweeds, I think they are. I don't know, but with the color of the ocean and so forth, and the sky, I thought it captured it very well. And captured in the colors that come out in Australian Aboriginal painting. This is a painting of ascending, of going from death through other worlds to the realm of the ancients. So they don't have a dark sort of lamentation. For them it's a progression through dream time, through other beautiful. But look what a beautiful image this is also on the cover of Sophia book series, by the way. This is, you have a book in that series. So, yeah.
On Tagore.
That's right, on Tagore, that's right, and that's on the cover. Yes. Okay, so here's now Tagore. So Tagore's grief and depictions thereof in text and paintings. So, moving forward, so Gajendranath Tagore, a nephew of Rabindranath, and a poet and critic in his own right, once interpreted many of the heart-wrenching poems and later experimental quasi-impressionistic, well, I shouldn't say quasi-impressionistic, I've changed my mind as to it being impressionism of any kind at all. Anyway, his paintings by the Nobel laureate, Rabindranath Tagore, who we see here, said that through his suffering, as the four walls collapsed around him, and you can see there will be paintings of the four walls collapsing, there was still a rasa or delight or jouissance being enjoyed by someone in the transcendental planes, namely an otherwise benevolent God. So you sort of see that there's some transcendental, sublime joy, beauty somewhere. I think he's invoking Abhinav Gupta, who said that all the rasas eventually end in Shanta rasa, the rasa of peace. Yeah. And I must say that in all the work that I've done on grief and so forth, I don't find that as an end. It comes and goes, there are ebbs and flows. Some moment, there might be a little bit of joy and so on, but then one falls back again, It does not end. Where Abhinav gives this theory, I don't know, but it may be a different context, and I think people here more qualified than me should be able to tell us. But so I'm looking for that in Tagore's paintings, and I don't find. I find a little bit in his poems. There's a slight relief, he lets himself go because of the powerful pull of nature. He sees it in nature. So if we go back to this painting here, he might overlook that and say, look at that though, isn't there a delight, isn't there a relish at that, or in this painting here. So Tagore in Shantiniketan teaching, and I just threw this in, because I do come to Gandhi at the end. Gandhi and Tagore were great friends, and this is Gandhi with Tagore in Shantiniketan. So the tradition that he grew up in, with his, I just mentioned his nephew and so on, they were playing around with paintings that came from the classical traditions and so on, and they had Okokura, a Japanese artist who told them about Pan-Asianism, and they were working with Chinese watercolor and so on. Some of this is pretty well known, and it's sort of rather benign, nothing confronting, sort of wall paintings and that kind of things, which was also wonderful right in that moment of Kalighat painting and industry, company painting and so forth. And some of this the British loved, and they bought them, and the Bhadralok, the upper middle class, the educated Bengalis loved these paintings and so on. So Tagore takes to paintings later in his life. It was 68 or something he was when he starts painting. 60, yeah. Pretty late. So what are the circumstances? Now here, I draw from a stage performance marking the 150th anniversary of Rabindranath Tagore's birth in what was then East Bengal, which was held in Los Angeles in 2013, and none other than Devashish Banerjee was one of the choreographers and provided the poetry that was recited right there, and I was there, totally blown by it, absolutely. So I take the account, and this was done with music and the whole stage was so beautifully set up. Anyway, here's just the storyline. April 1884, 120 years ago. Well, now I guess we have to add another 5 years. At that time, Jorashanko, the ancestral home of the Tagores, was enveloped by a thick shadow of death, which was to cast its gloom for a long time to come. A 25-year-old daughter-in-law of the family had ended her life for reasons not clearly established even today. For the past 16 years, she had been a friend, a mother figure, and a muse of Rabindranath Tagore, the most famous of all the illustrious Tagores. Her name was Kadambari Devi. She was Natu Bautan, or Bautan Kroon to Rabindranath, his sister-in-law. Coming from a humble social background, 9-year-old Kadambari Devi had entered the house of the Tagores, which was blessed with wealth and wisdom, and was a beehive of cultural activities where enlightened minds exchanged, entertained, and embraced fresh ideas in all spheres of life. And Kadambari on Rabindranath, this is her on him. Having you as the pole star of my life, never again will I be lost in this ocean. However, when Bhagna Hriday was published as a book in 1881, sorry, I think that maybe that it was dedicated to Srimati Hay. I don't know totally the context. Or Hay is supposed to be an abbreviation of Hecate, a witch appearing in Shakespeare's Macbeth, which the two of them had read together. it is accepted that this publication was dedicated to Kadambari Devi. So he just used that name. Right? By the way, Hekate is a symbol also used in the Sophia Journal on the website. By now, her companion Rabindranath was an acclaimed poet, and so more of her elder sister-in-law, the wife of Satyendranath Tagore. Her own husband, Jyotindranath, was involved with his latest venture of shipbuilding. Under such circumstances, leading to loneliness, 4 months after Rabindranath Tagore got married to Mrinalini Devi in April 1884, for reasons as yet not clearly established, Kadambari Devi committed suicide. Soon after her demise, certain poems were published, and Rabindranath dedicated all 3 works to the memory of Kadambari Devi, without explicitly naming her. Each of these dedications indicate the nature of their relationship, how literature had brought them together, and how Rabindranath was encouraged and inspired by her personality, and how intentionally he missed her presence. So just moving a little on, the death of Kadambari Devi left a void in the life of Rabindranath that was to inspire many memorable poems all through his life. 17 years after her death, Rabindranath described this complex relationship in his memorable novella, Nashtani, which was subsequently made into an exquisite film, Charulata, directed by Satyajit Ray. I recommend we bring that film and show it here one day. It's absolutely brilliant. I've even saw the play done in Delhi not so long ago. When Rabindranath started painting after the age of 60, the eyes of Kadambari Devi, perpetually haunting him, have reappeared in many of his portraits. So let's just say before he paints Kadambari Devi, he starts painting nature and so forth, but you can see it's no longer that colorful, bright rainbow, colored sky and so forth. It's space, there's darkness, and there's void. And this is repeated, and then he has animals. And today, I think we'll have Devashish trying to tell us that he is God. I have a feeling, and I use maybe Freudian psychoanalysis and so forth. There are symbols, there are images of animals and so forth that are associated with certain emotions and moments of tragedy, which emerge in. I have seen millions of cats, for example, in moments of that kind, chasing after me coming from all over the place, nowhere. And space, this is an interesting one. I think even space curves, darkness also curves. Now that's something that we would never think of, but the curvature of darkness, so that it creates little nooks and corners where it can grab you. You can't try and disappear, but you're not going to go anywhere. You'll be enveloped by more darkness. So darkness has a way of almost, becoming an animal. That's if I show you, you can see that there is a face and an eye and so on. So this is an animal, but it's also a space of darkness. And even more so, as you see, serpentine. So this is really a complex painting, but there is a serpentine creature here, but there is also a lot of darkness flowing about too. There's a sky that's dark, there's a landscape. So you can see this as swirling water, or you can see this as trees and so on. And he's deliberately, I think, combining a lot of these images. But then he moves on to the figurine. And here, it's almost unmistakable that, the eyes, if you like, if you see the face and the eyes of Kadambari coming across in the painting. In 1914, 30 years, he came across a photograph of her in Allahabad, which inspired him to write one of his famous poems and perhaps his greatest tribute to her. Many years later, explaining the poem to a young girl in Mangpu, the poet had said thus, "What a marvel, I thought, only a few days ago, one who was so real, one who was so much to us, where is that person today? Standing aside from our life, how far away? Yeah, how far away? Our life is running onward, but she has stopped over there. She has stopped over. How little is she remembered? Yet, did I forget you? Did I forget you? How little is she remembered? Yet, did I forget you? Yes, I did, he says. What is that oblivious? Because you exist deeply in me. I don't have to remember you outwardly. Because you are the root of my life. Because you came once into my life, my world is so full of joy, my life is filled with nectar. Revealed here is the secret of the poetry steeped in longing and yearning, but always positive, always brimming with optimism, always inspired by the muse. Always inspired by the muse who disappeared from his life in the infancy of his youth, but was the poet within forever. It was her death that inspired his unique vision of death. It was so. This one here could be her death. This is I think in the excerpts that I was reading out. He says the acquaintance I made with death at the age of 24. So it's her death. Was a permanent one, and its blow has continued to add itself to each succeeding bereavement, woven into an ever-lengthening chain of tears. And so, you know, he also, moving on now, he also tries to sort of depict her. He says, okay, now that unique voice of hers, that very familiar, sweet and loving invitation of hers will not be heard anymore. I feel whatever new joys and sorrows she faces, so he's almost imagining her in the other world, in another world. Where is she? What would she be like? What is she doing? Will she recognize me if she sees me? And this comes in this poem. So whatever new joys and sorrows she faces, I will have nothing to do with that. If we met suddenly after a long time, you know, if I met suddenly, near her will be many unknown to me. Near me will be many unfamiliar to her. And yet, both of us will belong to each other. Only to each other. Belong to each other. I thought it was so poignant that I could take the poems to you guys and actually find images. And this is, I have many images that I had to really work very hard to get to see. And I couldn't get a photograph of all of them. They wouldn't let me, but they let me have copies of slides that they have. And I think there's only two of us who've seen that whole it doesn't come outside. They're just so protective of it. There's a reason why they're protective of it, because Rabindranath Tagore's Nobel Prize medal was stolen, and they're very careful that they don't want anything else of his stolen. Because in the black market they'll fetch a lot of money. But it was very good of them to let me actually take some of the slides of the images. Okay, so the world is no longer bright for, and I'll finish some slides and then I'll come to the conclusion. The world is not so bright anymore. So all his paintings are just about at this sort of level of the dialectic of light and darkness, but you know, sort of, we would say, lead me from light to darkness. No, sorry, no, it's the other way. Lead me from darkness to light. Here it's sort of almost like what I used to say, because I never liked that. I used to always say in standing in the classroom, lead me from light to darkness. And from immortality to mortality. So philosophers know that there's too much immortality around. Okay, so the world is not so bright. This is almost Pandavas and Kauravas. Remember that the very first scene, I mean, you can see them, people in fight, in anger. He's actually capturing anger here more than anything else. And so there are feasts going out there, you know. Oh, you know, there's up the wall, you know. President Trump. Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't say that. So now here are the images of, so you can see half is alive, but the other half is not. This is how he's imagining. You've gone through grief of a person, these images appear in one. There's only half. Where's the other half? Oh, you said for me to bring you a dark chocolate, but you're not here. Well, how can you be asking me for dark chocolate? You see, yes, you're here. And this one is a striking one. But you can see there is really, in a way, no body, right? But the strokes, really strokes of pen. And yet there is a body, or there is a movement. That's about all you see. You see a movement of this being away. And it's an amazing, it's almost, well, how would you see a ghost in some context if you were to, because it doesn't have a body. It's angelic sort of figure. You know, it's wind basically. That's how Bhut and Pretas are described. Like it's wind. It's just prana. There's just breath. Receding, disappearing. And this one disappearing in swirling motion of dance with the hair flying out. It's incredible. Amazing. There are some. He describes some of them, but very, very sparsely, very sporadically. The dark takes form in the heart of the white and reveals it. The dark reveals the white even in the heart. There is no. And again, the dark reveals. I thought that would deal. And now some self-portrait. How does he feel about himself? How does he see himself? He sees himself tortured. There's elongation of the face. These are described in certain literature on grief and so on. People come and report, it's like a heavy lead on my head. My face is running away, or my cheeks are drooping, or my eyes are running this side. You know, people sort of, they're no longer the three-dimensional being that they are. It's like Marcuse's one-dimensional being, one-dimensional man, as he called it, or two-dimensional, or 2.5. You're walking this way, but you seem to be going that way. It's Tagore is painting about himself. What is it? The black and white threads weave the destiny of man into a mystery of entanglements. So here is a good example of the entanglements. The white and the black weave through entanglements. And there is, again, in this one, there is no body, but just the face and the eye peering at you. Very, you can use the term ghostly, but I think it's much more going on in here. Because it's not just an external thing, it's an internal. This is an internal. It's internal, it's externalized internal. Jouissance of the transcendental upon us. I thought at some point, this hasn't come out too well, but there is someone here looking up and sort of saying, wow, really? Wow, something's going on. That's the only painting that I find where he has a shred of joy or ananda. Someone is looking at him. We have to look at this closely to see that. It's much clearer in here. There are two figures here. This one is pointing to something, that the extension of this, and this one is saying, wow, really, yeah. Okay. All right, so one more. This is, again, a remarkable self-portrait. Feeling macabre. It speaks for itself. Look at this one. The Answer Melancholia. It's Edmund the Scream. Munch, yes. There's a little bit of that too. I took it out. I had Edmund Munch, but I thought I won't. So melancholy. And here, the one-dimensional feel. The one-dimensional I just mentioned. You feel wooded. You feel one-dimensional. So as nothing moving. Here is anger. Now, this is the one that inspired Nandalal Bose to do Gandhi, right? This is the one, yeah. So Gandhi marching. This is not Gandhi, of course. This is anger of Tagore. But Nandalal Bose does one of Gandhi. It's remarkable. Here again, darkness. There's a little bit of yellow in there, but it's not, it's not evoking any joy or sense of, peace or anything. It's nature even takes the takes a hue of darkness. Memory leaves its touches on the serum of oblivion as the mind lingers on its wayside wanderings. So this is in a way a wayside wandering as well. but even more so in this one here. Bleak red road called dead-ended. Where's the mind going to go? This is a beautiful song. I'm painting a hole that runs through my door where the light keeps wandering. It comes of wandering. It's the idea of wandering. Okay, so the eyes, the haunting eyes we talked about. Kadambari's eyes are haunting right through, over and over again, over and over again. And there is another part to this that I didn't read out, but it sort of suggests that it's not just grief here, but it's how melancholy as well. Perhaps she's also feeling the same. So she's seeing and she's projecting that onto me as well, and I feel that too. So there isn't a sort of a binary here. There isn't a stark dualism that it's me and her. That it's intertwined. So, and why I say that it's intertwined is in this here, there is a transition from a woman to a man of a very similar, there's almost like a similar group. One takes off the other, and the other reflects off this one, bounces off this one. So I can see that. And some poems take you to that too. The dark, we've already read that one there. Here it's interesting, there is a little bit of laughter coming in, but it could be from that, I see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. It could be from that, right? It could be from that, but I don't know. It's in the actual image, the colors. So this was red. Perhaps mirth and joy goes with red, but certainly, apathy does not much joy in there, and the other one very brown. But look at this one here, not on top of it all, but can still smile. So it's almost like in another place where someone has sort of said like a madman's smile. He feels, this is a self-portrait. I feel, look at one side of the face coming out that way, another part going that way. A smile, but it's a smile at oneself, and it's empty smile. It's not really any joyous. And there is a smile on her face too. So he wishes her well. He wishes that perhaps she is in her glory. As I knew her, there she is. This one is hard to read, but not to worry. So I'm going to finish now with the last few, which again show the connection between the two. This is the woman, ever strange to me, and yet I seem to know her. So, if you know someone, there's a little more positive image about that person, right? I know her. And of course, I know her intimately because she's part of me. All right, so finally, the crisis of self-identity. How do you represent your identity? Well, sometimes they ask you identity card, and this is what I want to give them at TSA. This is how I feel, on a long line, waiting, getting lost at the airport and so on. Okay. The phantoms of faces come within a lot of, I can't read that too well. But anyway, here are images of, I have to figure this out, but they may be dancing, they may be performing, but not a great, not much joy in the colors, as you can see. All right, objects out there appear crooked. That's another, and this is a remarkable, again, the kind of the elongation that happens on the face when you're in that deep, and there's a shrinkage as well. There's a sense in which there's one is pretty well in a shrinkage state. The body feels like a lead balloon. I mentioned that a little earlier. The body actually feels like a lead balloon, that heaviness, there's a heaviness about the body in there. The view from the balcony is stark, like today, San Francisco. Dull and dark and gloomy. And finally, there are some images of, varied images of the women, some of which I have already shown, but some that I did not. That one and that one had not appeared. But this is a very famous one, it's a cover of a book as well, of his paintings. But contrast to this, again, this one here hasn't come up, but you can see there are two parts to this being, to this person as well. There's never one complete part. There's always another side that counteracts any sense of joy or light, fullness. The fullness is more of darkness than of light in his. You can see that half and that half. All right, and then the last lot again. Very melancholic self-painting. I'll skip that, and I think I read out part of that already. Again, this ubiquitous half revealing and the other half not revealing, because we don't know the other half. Philondas, the four walls collapsing. This is his image of the four walls collapsing. Nature's grief burning on Kandava's forest. And it's quite sort of coincidentally, he also has an image of the forest burning and animals fleeing and running. And this one here, the eye seeking for the enigma of things, explore boundless nothing. Man paints nothingness. I've been looking for an image of nothingness for a long time for my papers, and there it is. Look at that. And it could be, isn't a horse, it could be Yudhishthira ascending to heaven, and he knows that that's what in Hindi they say polompol, it's actually empty out there, it's not much going, but where is he going to go? And this is Tagore towards the end of his life, and I think this image speaks for itself. So I'm going to read out just the conclusion now. Now, some have tended to analyze emotion as an evaluative or normative judgment, a judgment about my situation and or about all the people. And this is from Robert Solomon. If one interprets cognitive content of emotion as being evaluative, as Robert Solomon did in his early views, and Martha Nussbaum continues this trend, then this is what marks the emotion of grief as well. The intense evaluative judgment or appraisal element here could include increasing references to an agent's desire and goals, or rather their frustration, petrification. So, Nussbaum says that, she was flying out, her mother is dying and so forth, so she has the emotion. I'm trying to make sense of this. Always it's someone very important in my life has died. So that's an evaluative judgment. Someone very important in my life has died. And that's what she more or less reduces the emotion to. She talks about the body feelings and so forth, but that's secondary. Other researchers have insisted on the bodily disturbances, the unthinking energies, as it's called, and perturbations of non-intellectual mentation processes in the agent, so that experiences such as trembling, blushing, perspiring, and other neurological symptoms are significant constituents. They're not just ancillary, they're not just secondary, as a number of psychologists have tried to say. I think psychologists understand this better than philosophers. Indeed, these would be fundamental structural registers of emotional response. And this is evidenced not just in human beings with a quaint sentimentality, but also in animals, as I showed. And even people like John Stuart Mill acknowledge that animals feel emotions, and they feel strong negative emotions also. This gives warrants to the idea that the hard emotions, such as grief, involve a much larger metaphysical tapestry, perhaps even ontological ones, than say the more short-fused emotions such as anger or even moral indignation do. So I'm arguing that we really need to separate out grief, melancholy, and these things, and look at it very, very differently to how people look at anger and so forth. Finally, I like, as I mentioned, Gandhi. So this is the last paragraph. I liken Gandhi, especially as he faces the neo-collapse of the Indian subcontinent, as it is being rent apart with communal violence on the eve of its independence, to the doyen of morality in the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira, the man who was rising up to heaven. Because there was nothing to celebrate on earth. You might as well go to the land of nothingness. They call it heaven, but who knows what's there. Anyway, particularly the disenchantments of the entire clan that he bore witness to along with the carnage of the war as it drew to an unending end, and the constant rebuke he faced from Draupadi for wandering the earth with his dog without founding a stable foundation for dharma or grounding it in firm absolutes. This is also illustrated with an ecological canvas portraying nature's grief on the faces of the 6 species of animals surviving the ruthless, irrational act of burning down the Khandava forest by some playful instinct that overcame Krishna and Arjuna, and I showed that. Perhaps this cavalier act is indicative of non-absoluteness of non-violence, which the Jain and Buddhist, vis-a-vis the Jain and Buddhist ethics by the time of the epics. Ahimsa or non-injury as a virtue is catalogued, but only as a prudential imperative, that is, if it serves a purpose. And sacrifice is condemned where animals are used, but animals are used as vehicles and killed by the thousands, close to 1 million, in the battlefield. The Ashwamedha horse sacrifice is performed when installing Yudhishthira to the royal crown, which he doesn't turn up for. And as just mentioned, the Khandava forest with all its inhabiting animals are smitten. It wasn't until Gandhi, and to an extent Tagore, that ahimsa as non-injury is transformed into the positive virtue of non-violence and put back on the ethical high ground, that is, given a moral ontological prerogative all of its own as a virtue. And it has a strong positive emotion, the action-tending emotion embedded in it, as well as conscious. But it could also, as in the case of Gandhi showed, it could also lead to very negative emotion or dark emotion if that project failed. So when the big massacre happened in Amritsar, Gandhi said it was a Himalayan blunder, and he went into fast, he went to retreat. And when some of the other satyagraha actions failed, he didn't think that the salt march actually gained much. It shook the British, but that was about it, really. Bardoli, there was another satyagraha, and he was very, very disappointed as with some of the, and he would go into fasting to sort of get his emotion out. But he was most distraught towards the end when he saw Bengal being ripped apart, what became Pakistan being ripped apart by the carnage that was happening there. The British left it in a great mess. So yeah, and you could, in some ways this could be Gandhi sort of looking at it and saying, what did we really achieve? What did we do? We perhaps end with grief. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so Purushottama, I think that was really a moving reflection, meditation on grief overall.
Yes.
And I really take to heart what you said about the qualitative difference between grief.
If I sit here, then you'll be speaking to the whole audience. Yes.
So between quality as an emotion and
Right.
the other rasas, or the other bhavas, which don't address to that extent the almost fundamental, sort of grief of being on earth.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something irreducible to the faulty nature
Right.
of our existence,
Yeah.
which is why, we look at existence as something like a fall. Whatever tradition we are looking at, it seems to be a fall.
Yeah.
Whether it's the fall of Adam and Eve or the fall of Purusha becoming the fragmented reality of what we live. Something is irretrievably lost. There's an irretrievable grief. And so there is something which, as I read the way in which you presented it, there's, in trying to make or look for a resolution to grief, there's always a residue somewhere.
Yeah.
And in the Indian tradition, we've tried to, through the Natya Shastra, etc., try to arrive, or through the Bhagavad Gita, try to arrive at some kind of resolution. But I think what I read is that when we come to modernity, we start coming to grips with this irreducible thing, with Tagore it becomes the muse actually.
Mm.
I think in your paper there was a part that you didn't read where you're actually talking about Tagore's description of his experience after Kadambari Devi died.
Yes.
And he says he was inconsolable, but
Yes.
there were moments of clarity and peace.
Yeah.
And he says to himself that that's because he suddenly realizes that there's another existence
Right.
beyond the existence of all our emotional life as human beings or even as creatures.
Right.
That beyond this, there's something where she has gone,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
She has gone somewhere where we can imagine a complete otherness and alterity to our emotional existence, which brings him a certain kind of peace. But like you said, these moments are short-lived. They're only interruptions.
Yes,
Right.
yes. I wanted to separate it from Abhinav Gupta's
Exactly.
culmination.
Exactly. I wanted to also comment on that, the more classical, the Abhinava Gupta sort of Shanta Rasa is the kind of capstone.
Capstone, yeah.
Yeah, that actually, he's a Shaiva. And one can see this as the dancing Shiva,
Yeah.
And interestingly, I was reminded of Yeats. And, Tagore's own take, actually his more classical take was sort of like that. And even the Brahmo idea, which was not exactly the Advaitin idea.
No.
The Brahmo idea was is of a transcendental being who is expressing these various emotions,
Right.
which we experience as the
Right.
emotions of life,
Right.
but it's really somebody behind that who is delighting in these, it's the Ananda Tandava that is going on through all these experiences. And so one of the Tagores, it's a relative of the Tagores, called Mohini Mohan Chatterjee.
Yes.
He was in England
Yes.
and had some meetings with Yeats. And then Yeats writes a poem called Mohini Mohan Chatterjee.
This is the W.B. Yeats who translates the Gita.
That's right. So he wrote a poem called Mohini Mohan Chatterjee, where this is the transcendental idea that he expresses. And then it comes through again in a number of his poems, one of which ends with the lines, I'm trying to remember the lines, O chestnut tree, great rooted blossomer, are you the root, the blossom, or the bowl? O body swayed to music, brightening glance, how can we tell the dancer from the dance?
Right.
So this is it. The dance is going on. We are the expressions of the dance.
Yeah.
But the dancer is dancing. This is the Nataraj who's dancing. And can we go to the Nataraj? And that's the Shanta,
Of course.
which colors all the other emotions. And this is what Abhinava Gupta was trying to come to. But I agree that even if one gets to that, or if one gets to what the Buddhists are looking for, a kind of karuna which is transcendental, there is a residue that remains, that you can't really...
Yudhishthira shows that right.
Exactly. And I think that's the beauty of your paper.
Oh, thank you. You got it. I'm more Heideggerian in that sense that, there is really no finality to our being. The existential quiddity, may well be this one. Well, Heidegger and Sartre and people kind of leave it at nothingness of some kind. But, Heidegger has Sorg. But I think he comes with Sorg, which is care, right?
Care of this.
Anna would know more of that. I'm sure you use it in your work. So Sorg, care. But I think he's got that as an antithesis to the feeling of grief, being overcome with grief, with melancholy and so on. But he doesn't run that in emotion. He avoids talk about emotion. But I think Jaspers does a little bit more of it. I think you can see in Jaspers, I think there's more of this going there. And other later people will sort of develop this as well. Of course, but the same existentialist kind of thing that number of existentialists, using a more Nietzschean kind of Apollonian response to it as well, committed suicide because there was nothing else to do. This is a combination of lamenting about the emptiness of the world. Yeah, but I don't think Tagore was going there. I think he could hold on to it, but hold on to it knowing that it's fragile.
I think the two things that come out, one is that he feels she is within him.
Yes.
And the other thing is that she's an inspiration.
She's still an inspiration.
She
Yes,
continues to
be an
inspire
inspiration.
him
That's right.
towards something beyond.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, we may not live there, but it may play in with the materiality. So there's a materiality element as well.
Right.
He's not giving up materiality. So he's saying
I
that you
think
could help me transform materiality.
Yeah, in the
make
Indian
it more
classical
creative.
sort of a corpus, there is an alternative, which is that of Savitri, who does not give in to, she could have, when she heard that her husband is going to die, come to a resolution, say all human beings die, so I'll just accept it.
True, yeah.
But she doesn't. She becomes pure will that ultimately rests, which is that the kind of like the Orpheus story or whatever. The power of love as will to overturn Okay. So I think that's another alternative. It's in this case there is no overturning, but there is a kind of aspiration.
That's right. In the poem that he wrote, the night that he spent with his wife, it comes out. I have that, but I didn't read that out. So Gitanjali has a lot more of that. But I was focusing on the later part, and I wondered how much of it remained, and I found. That love is there, of course, but it's unrequited. It's a love that's not going to really find fulfillment anymore, not going to be complete, and if anything, it's going to create more longing. The longing in dark spaces. Hey, maybe we want to open up.
Open up.
So we have other reflections that people have to make. Well, I think the chair should take the questions.
Oh, no.
Yeah, just go ahead or just open it. All right, well then, go for it, yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify and understand the part where, two things, I think I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly. Like the place where you feel you're differing from Abhinavagupta, and also the place in which you were trying to show how grief was different from the other emotions on the list.
Right. Yeah, okay. Well, I think also as Devashish mentioned in the commentary, so Abhinavagupta kind of says, here are all these wonderful emotions and the rasas and so forth, and it sort of, when you go through all of this, it ends as all Bollywood movies end.
Classic.
in song and dance, basically, and the hero has come home, and any of Shah Rukh Khan's movies, there's always a wedding,
Okay.
And this poor Muslim guy has to go through Hindu weddings in the movie. I mean, he must be totally bored by it. I've actually seen them, standing there totally bored with these Hindu ceremonies and things. So so this culmination is the idea that all these rasas will culminate. In Buddhism, I guess there is nirvana, but really nirvana is just full of compassion. So their ultimate is compassion, if you like, in the end, because you remain a bodhisattva for a long time before you even take on, and the bodhisattva is full of compassion. Because Abhinavagupta's guy, you can imagine him to be at some point, and happiness and so forth, even though they've gone through all this, disturbing, perturbing. There's somehow, he's able to see, like the sadhu who's able to sit naked on a rock of ice and not feel death at that moment, because you could die, but no, he's actually enjoying. So that's what Abhinavagupta is getting at. But we're saying, okay, there may be moments of it, splits splits of it. You had a big long day of feeling totally down and out and melancholic and so forth. You might see a sunset, and it would bring you, little joy. But then darkness falls anyway, right? Almost literally, right? The moon might come out as walking away from Venus Bay. You left the sunset behind, but the wonderful bloody moon comes out, and you're still enjoy till 1 o'clock in the morning. But it's very different in this case. So what we were showing about Tagore, with his nephew Gajanendranath said, oh, but there was a wonderful joy and so forth, and we're saying, no, was very in bits and pieces. And the second one was...
The second part is just the differentiation between grief and the other emotions.
Oh,
You seem
yeah,
to want
yeah.
to definitely make a split.
Yeah, I want to make a categorical kind of difference.
So I was curious.
Not
like
only
before.
difference in degree, but in kind.
Yeah,
so
that's what I
I
thought.
want to set it aside. In a way, Freud's done that to some extent with his, wonderful essay on melancholy. Well, he is dealing with that, but he's tying that with the unconscious. He's saying that there's a quality of the unconscious which is very, very different to the other sort of stuff in, look at melancholy and mourning. So it's a melancholy and mourning, which is why I called mine grief and mourning, because I thought grief was really much more fundamental to this than melancholy. And as people have noticed that, Solomon and even Nussbaum acknowledged that at one point too, that yes, we need to take it out of that old paradigm that Bob Solomon himself had started by saying emotions are evaluative judgments. Everybody ran with that, and Nussbaum is still stuck in that, and she ties grief into that. So, and I published that paper of hers, in one of my volumes, but I reacted against that, because Matilal died just as I was publishing this essay, and I said, and we all had very different response to Matilal's dying at that time than Nussbaum had to her mother dying, and so we decided to do this work and turn her over a little bit on this. Okay. So maybe few 20, 30 years later, when psychologists get to this kind of material, they'll say, oh yeah, these philosophers were really talking about something, so let's now, do a separate paradigm. You have to move completely away from behaviorist psychology, of course, maybe away from cognitive as well. There's so much emphasis. This is not cognitive. They're not going to find grief in the cognitive processes and so forth. They're going to have to go elsewhere. So bodily, and Nussbaum does give a very good term to me, says unthinking energies. She does talk about that, but it doesn't make it very primary. She just sort of, puts it, but I say, I wouldn't be surprised if she picked that up from the papers I had already written on Arjuna, feeling I call it the perturbations of desire, that paper, that the energies are perturbated. So it's not unthinking. Why bring thinking back into it again, right? So even unthinking is a misnomer. You're still trying to say, well, there's a thinking energy and there is unthinking energy. Well, get away from that altogether, right? So I had to call it sort of perturbations of physiological. Nietzsche is much better because he talks about physiognomy quite a lot. He just says the diet's not going to deal with it, but that's really where basically I want to locate it somewhere. I don't know. Maybe when we do some more yoga and tantric stuff in that, and then it may be the chakras. I don't want to go that far yet, but because then we'll lose the experimental side. So I want to see if we can. There are people who have done. There was an Australian psychiatrist. He did work on Holocaust survivors, and it was quite extraordinary that his description of the Holocaust survivors, of what they were still suffering, because he was trying to figure out what it is that these people still have in their heads going on years and years after. And so they had to invent the term Holocaust to capture. Holocaust is a very pregnant term. It's not just what happened in Auschwitz. It's what these people come with. It's alive. They did a whole theater. A guy wrote a whole set of plays on this, and you can see it. Holocaust is happening on the stage there. So that was what was capturing, and it's in the memory. It's in Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize winner, who writes about some of these things too, and it was really like in a way Tagore writing. It was okay, maybe Oh, I think it's your hand, yeah.
So this is a broader question about like this idea of the irreducibility of down to, we're talking about like existence and the emotions. When an artist is painting an expression,
Right.
are they in part trying to reduce or contain, just through the representation, this, you know, in this case, grief, they're trying to reduce it into a physical expression in a way. Take the, you know, physiological or mental expression and put it into representation.
What would you say?
I'd say sublimate rather than reduce.
Yeah, yeah, maybe sublimation. I think there's a theory of materiality, as you know, that says that, you know, materiality is not just the external substances and properties, dravya and qualities and so forth. It's our being and all the various different responses and so forth that we're making is very much part of that. So there's a continuum there. So I see Tagore's painting as a continuum of his emotions working in with the paint itself. That's why at one point so and not just that too, but the other materiality which is more ethereal is him and her. And he uses the word entanglement too, white and black entangling. Similarly, the white and black are entangling here as well. So that's why I withdrew the term post-impressionist or quasi-impressionist, because he's not creating impressions of anything. It's not representation, as Devesh is saying. There is a continuum. So if we can think of artwork, I mean the work of art, Heidegger gets reasonably close to that, because he says that this is not representation. He wants to say presentation. So there's a presentation. But I want to go even further than that. And I want to say that, you know, the art is not just the pigments, you know, on a brush, on a canvas. There is another element of it. And that's what we're trying to revive and see in there. That what was in Tagore, this particular look is there in the painting as well. In some material sense, not just platonic form that he's captured. You know, if we can think in those terms, it would be very useful and important. Yeah, I mean, you know, the work that you're doing with the you know, the images and so forth, the meditational stuff and so forth. I think there is a creation of that too, right? I mean, the visualizations also invite you to create those visualizations at that moment. They're not static, they're not just there. There are a lot of things that you put into it. I remember this, the Tibetan things that say, well, you know, the visualization, I'll just give you the outline of something, and then your desires, let your desires go in and create. And so, you know, there was a case where Jeffrey Hopkins and Jose Cabezeno, if we know those colleagues, came out and said, but we're gays, you know, and here they got male and female images. What are we going to do? Right? So the monks sort of led them to say, you know, and I heard them say that at a higher plane, look, we do have those images too, but you put in as much as you want to in there. We'll just give you some blank, you know, blank templates and so forth. And so they created a whole new. There is a work they've done on visualization, which, you know, Buddha guys, as they call them, Buddha guys use. So yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
I just loved the Abhinavagupta Bollywood ending, you know. Maybe, I don't know if that's exactly what he's getting at, but
I wouldn't want to make Bollywood so sophisticated. I mean, just today something completely rankled me. I mean, this friend of mine is a very good, you know, proponent of classical Indian art and dance, but also Bollywood. Said, I'm so busy, I'm doing this thing, Summers, what is it? The Shakespeare?
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer Nights? Bollywood dream.
Oh, yeah.
Meet summarized Bollywood dream. If I could have screwed the email, I would have done it right. So, yes.
I'm wondering, do you think, well, because I like that you gave this permission, that you have this, this sort of giving back aesthetic theory to painting and so forth.
Right, right.
I've had very profound aesthetic experiences in a museum that
Yes.
I've never had in a movie theater. I've
see.
laughed and cried and so forth, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But, I'm wondering, is it possible to convey something like Mahabharata in the inevitable, film versions that are coming out? If you were artistic director for such a film, what would you say is the easiest thing to mess up and get wrong?
Yeah.
And what is the most important thing to get across aesthetically?
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, I come from my family, the Bilimorias were on stage. I mean, the West Coast, the East Coast, West Coast. The Parsi people, they were on the stage. So they were doing Shakespeare and stuff like that way before, way before the sort of the silent movies and so forth. In fact, some of the first movies made by a person from Calcutta actually came to Bombay to take image. So they were already sort of working on pretty sophisticated, sometimes folk theatre as well. And I remember my father, my uncles sort of enacting them in their home. They would sort of have a little theatre thing going on. And it was quite amazing. And they would natak, they would call it nataka, natak, and there was another notaka. Notanki, that's right. So they were acting out lots of dramas and stuff like that. And there was sort of, we felt deep emotions in that one too. And then the early movies that were coming out after the independence in the 1950s and 60s, there was a lot of melancholy in that because they were trying to get through the melancholy of partition, of the dire end of the carnage and so forth. There wasn't, Bollywood hadn't been invented. There wasn't song and dance. There were songs, Nosad and Akhtar and some of these people before Ashok Kumar and Kishore Kumar came to. But even then, there were people singing in very, very deep voice. Some of them were Muslims. The lyrics, the people writing them were Muslims. The lyrics were being written by people who were from Lahore and places like this. So they had the Sufi kind of element in them as well. In fact, the great singer Mohammad Rafi came from Lahore. They were brought up in that. So like the Shishti music of the guy who some Master Kalandar, what's his name? Not Fazlul Khan.
Fateh Ali Khan?
Yeah, that's right. So, the early films, like you see, I can't speak of films from Bengal at that time, but there was a collaboration. But Satyajit Ray, of course, was doing that at that time, yes. But like Mother India and Satyajit Ray, and also some of the films coming out from the south, from Kerala, they were mostly socialist inspired, so very existentialist. I mean, they were showing death most of the time in some of their films, but the results of hard labor were not getting anywhere. And the threat of modernization, how it was disrupting village life and so forth. So they were doing a lot of that. In sort of recent times, there have been a few. Guru Dutt was making some of these films. Now, Guru Dutt was a Punjabi, but Geeta Dutt was, I think, Bengali, and Vedar Rahman was Bengali, right? Yes, so there was a collaboration of people from both ends who were making pretty tough films around these lines, and some of them would, and Satyajit Ray, as I said, made a film from Tagore's own play, and that's a very moving one. So, I think in time maybe Bollywood might get around to that, but right now it's really all box office hits is what they're looking at. Yeah, 1.3 billion people. How do you get them into the movie theater? Well, you make the kinds of even Padmavat, what was going to be very promising, but turned out to be a little more drab than it was. So it's good songs. some bits, yeah. Oh.
I have a question, just to clarify a little bit. Do you think Tagore overall was it a healthy relationship with grief? Or do you think that it was a torment, like a tormenting? Like you think it was a bringing down and suffering? And,
Oh, what do the paintings tell you?
Yeah. So then the question is, how do you think that affected the culture in which embodied him so much, like the Bengali culture? Because they, like, more than anybody else in Bengal, Tagore has lived and breathed Gurudev. You mentioned his name, and hundreds of songs come to any person's. So it's like that culture has embodied that, like the subconscious.
I don't know, I haven't sort of looked into that far, but
I
certainly
think
the
you mentioned
literary and the
something,
artistic.
Purushottama, I think you mentioned something which was interesting, which is that if you look at his songs, he has a different relationship to grief in his songs and his paintings. I think in his songs he resolves it as a kind of a more aspirant kind of thing, a more sublime thing. But in his paintings there's more agony.
Sure.
I think so there's a whole spectrum.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes. And I think his paintings have had less influence on the culture.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Than his songs. I mean, everybody sings his songs there, and they're joyful. I mean, they're wonderful to listen to. You get very high on listening to his songs. And the national anthem, that was Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. But the national anthem of Bangladesh is written by him. But it's also because he involves a lot of Baul songs in his and his poetry, of course, is recited by everyone too. But they have a pretty high note in them, But I think his paintings, I think people don't pay that much attention, right? I mean, it's other later artists, Nandalal Ghosh and Jamini Roy and so forth. That's what you hear more about, and his nephews too. You hear, but yeah, I was a little stunned myself that even there was an exhibition in Oxford when I was studying there. And I remember going with Mohanty, Matila was involved in organizing. And we walked around, it was just only about that much, not much. It was somebody's private collection, where they came from, I don't know, maybe Tapan Rai Chaudhary had them. But Mohanty is giving commentaries impressionistic. This is the impressionistic of this one, related to Monet and so on and so on. And that's all we heard, and that's all we knew. And until I discovered this, and then I went looking for, and I think the first time I saw the paintings were, I think, the few paintings that you had when that was happening, not much, just very few, and I thought there has to be more, so that's what triggered.
Well, I was just wondering whether this different approach to grief of Tagore was partially due to him being much older when he did his paintings, right, than a lot of his other work. I often think, like, I love Walt Whitman.
Yes.
And when he was about 45 or 50, when he had a stroke. And I often wondered, what would his poetry be like then? He had this exuberant embrace of life.
Yes.
All of his poetry is just so filled with this glory of being. And I'm thinking, what do you do if you have a stroke and you're an invalid? He didn't write anything after that. And I'm thinking that maybe later Tagore, as he got older.
Do you think he's just getting older in this case, or because he would have continued to write his poetry, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah, and I don't know the contrast. I think Devashi would know whether his later poetry is contrastive in any way to his earlier.
No,
just
that
a
I don't
theory.
know. All I know is that some of the poetry that he's writing about Kadambari is certainly different to what even is in Gitanjali. That contrast I have drawn.
Yeah.
But overall, the poetry that he writes later on, I don't know.
I think he's still positive. I think it's not his age, it's the war. It's the two wars.
Yes.
He didn't see the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
He went in through despair, And it's
Yes.
Satyajit Ray's documentary on Tagore, if others haven't seen it.
No.
That's something really worth seeing.
Oh,
He
okay.
brings out so poignantly
Yeah.
Tagore's reaction to the war.
Ah,
I see, there you are.
And his last letter, The Crisis of Humanism, I think, it's his,
Yes, yes.
The Crisis of Civilization, or Crisis of Humanism, his last,
Humanism, I thought.
yeah, his last piece.
Yeah.
Yes. No.
And then he has poems that sort of transcend. His last poem is, his song is that A Mohamanu Ashe, this Superman is coming. This cosmic being is coming.
I love it.
So it was like Aurobindo
Yeah.
then.
Well,
And Kali Yuga, I mean, not Kali Yuga, what is Kalki?
it's something like that, some kind of higher being is coming.
Well, another theory that perhaps his painting was for a different audience, for himself more, than his other art, which was more open.
Yeah.
Maybe it was his kind of personal expression that
Yeah.
maybe it was not, he wasn't thinking of it as having huge audience in the same way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's more personal.
Yeah.
Maybe.
For me, there is a poem that he writes, actually a song, that he writes, Ratri eshe je tharmeshe,
Yeah.
Diner Parabari, which means that where the night meets the dawn. Basically, Diner Parabari, Tomai amar dekha holo, shei mohanar thare. It's like you and I meet at that
Junction,
shore,
at that
correct, at that shore. So basically, and there is also mention of that Nirab Majhe Bajlo Gobhir Bani. So basically, underneath the deep darkness, that deep sound is born, and you see at some kind of a line of that the darkest rock, the golden line. So that
It's like
that
one of the
is
images
basically-
here,
yeah,
yes.
that is like describing the sunrise. So
Yes.
it's really psychological sunrise.
Yes,
so
of
he is
course.
really looking forward to it.
Yes.
So basically, he's trying to say that the darkness is really what should I say, the messenger of
The light
dawn.
that's coming, the dawn, is the harbinger, as
Yeah,
they
yeah.
say, the harbinger of the dawn. Is
So
precedes it,
yeah.
It's like the Ashwins that in the morning
Exactly.
come
Exactly.
with the Jews, they're the ones who
Yeah.
clean up.
Even
because
the
sun is coming.
rock or
Yeah.
the golden line
The rock,
at the edge of the
golden
rock
light at the edge of the
is
rock.
exactly that Vedic that
Yes.
you rub the rocks
Yes,
to
yes.
get the soma.
Yes, yes,
so
yes.
so that
All right,
yeah,
yes,
so
yes,
that
you're
sort of
right.
Vedic images are there as well.
Wonderful.
So and also Dhai Janamor Shakul Bhalobasha Prabhu Tomar Pani. So that is a total prayer where the body is melting into prayer.
Wow, yeah.
So these
yeah.
are actually some of the last songs. Actually, Dhai Janamor is sung by him, which is very old Rabindranath Tagore's voice, which we
Yeah.
often hear on his birthdays. Yeah.
Oh, well, it would be wonderful to weave this into this narrative at some point. We have to sit and do
So
that,
yeah. So
And then images, we can always find images by him. I have seen, I will have to look through again. I'm sure there would be. I mean, I've been selective and I've been focusing much more on, the sort of the dark beats, but it would be lovely to see that. But it again, I think, nevertheless, it does reinforce the fact that it's, he doesn't think that light or that ray is going to supersede and completely wipe away the darkness, right? It will come back again in the evening, the dusk, the darkness of the dusk.
yeah.
But that's one of the poems that says that too, the dark.
Which one?
There was that tiny little bit of one of the places where he says, the darkness goes in to reveal, goes into the whiteness to reveal, in sort of outer lines and so forth. He thought he saw darkness went in to reveal white, the light. I mean, that's not the job of darkness, but you can see where he's putting the priority to. And in a way, we Mimamsakas know that Mimamsa has the theory of darkness, which overrides and supersedes any theory of light. For them, it's a more primary ontology than light. So
I mean, there was one thing about the light and the dark that I wanted to say through the painting and through the reading of the poem.
Yeah.
And it was just because I was reading that MLK quote about darkness driving out, can't drive out darkness, but only light can, and hate can't drive out hate, but only love can.
Yeah.
And I was just lecturing on it actually in my class on Thursday. And it seemed relevant here because one of the ideas that you're touching upon in that point is whether or not there's two quantities actually, there's
Right,
darkness
right.
and light, as
Yes,
opposed to the
yes,
physics
yes.
notion where
Yeah.
darkness is really the absence of light, there's only one quantity.
Yes.
It's like there's nothing that's cold, it's just the absence of mean kinetic energy.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting because in the phenomenon you're talking about, we have an encounter with a form of natural darkness, where the natural darkness has to do with the rotation of the earth, but it doesn't have to do with the pure absence of light, in the sense in which we talk
Yeah,
in
yeah.
physics about
Yeah.
light
Yeah.
and darkness being the absence of light.
No, it's not the
So it's
absence.
interesting in the poetry, like when he was giving the poem about the white and the light and the
Yeah.
dark,
Yeah.
and then you were showing some of the actual paintings. It was
Yeah.
interesting to think about what notion of darkness needed to be in the poem for the poem to make sense. Would it have to be could the physics
Sure.
notion make sense, or something like that? So yeah, I think the
But I
darkness.
think another sense is that he's actually got some view of darkness.
No, that's my point.
Yeah,
I think
it's
that,
very
yeah, you don't really see that.
Yeah.
Even
You
in
can
the
take the.
song.
Yeah, I think the idea is that there is another notion of darkness that has
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
in play here. Otherwise, this doesn't make any sense.
Oh, yeah.
In the MLK quote, it makes perfect sense because he must be alluding to that fact about light to make sense of his argument, actually. But here it seems like it's not that point.
No,
Yeah,
not
it's
at all.
very interesting.
No, and I think it's pretty much in the Indian thinking
Yeah.
that
Darkness
darkness
is
is
its
not
own-
just the absence.
Right, it's its own thing, yeah.
It is its own dravya,
Yeah.
it's its own substance.
Yes, but it would make sense also to think that if you think about it in terms of the natural phenomenon of light, as except for
Yeah,
the
it's a natural
abstract.
kind. Yeah.
No, the natural phenomenon of light we observe in our environment
Oh,
by the
yeah.
rotation of the.
Yeah,
If you're thinking of that phenomenon,
Right.
you would have this understanding.
Yeah. Well, think of the extremities of our universe, of our cosmos, where they don't have the sun that we have. I mean, what would be there? It wouldn't make sense to talk about the absence of light.
Right.
I mean, that's why I think it's a natural kind in that sense.
Yeah.
The same concept goes for like a
Mm,
black
sure.
hole too, right? When you start a black hole, but it's not because of absence of light. It's that is
Yeah.
the original state from which
Yeah.
things come out and maybe light comes out of darkness.
The
blackness
the
of
black hole.
black hole is it precedes the light, I would say. rather
Yeah,
than-
it eats the light. That's right. Yes, it
So,
it completely
that's the basic-
eats up and destroys light,
Yeah.
and then yet it's not really black in
Yeah.
any sense. That's only because it can destroy. So it has some priority over light.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. The black hole. Yeah. That's why they called it the black hole, I guess. Yeah. Right. Huh. Any more reflections? I'm sure. We have 10 minutes, I think, before we. So some more.
The concept of this grief is very interesting. Is it like what Dr. Fanji was saying? It's like that is the concept of separation from
Yeah.
something,
Yes.
or being like a limited existence as a jiva versus
Right.
your original state. That grief, is that more basic than any other feeling? Because
Yes.
when I look at say even the Tamil Arvar songs, the most famous Arvars, their songs are primarily on grief.
Really?
Yes, Nammarvar is supposed to be like
Yeah,
the
yes,
primary
yes.
Arvar among the 12, but all his songs are, reflect the grief of separation.
My goodness me.
So is that more basic than the other rasas that you had listed there?
Well, that's I mean, you need to write a paper on this for us. Yeah, that will be a paper with Dharma studies. Why not? I mean, yeah, if you can say that, look here, they're suggesting that it could be more basic, or and even distinguished from, maybe not separate, but a distinct. Yeah, I think that would be really wonderful. And why, the reasons why they might feel that. Yeah, so I didn't know that. Now come to think of it, yes, I do remember reading some of it, yeah. the separation, yeah, sure.
No, also on the, I think the Grieve stuff is very interesting too. But a question for you on the Grieve
Sure.
thing directly to sort of understand more details. Do you think that there's an essential phenomenology to Grieve?
Well, that's what I want to, to develop.
Yeah.
And the person who could have done it, Robert Solomon,
Mm.
unfortunately died, very,
Yeah.
very young in some ways.
Because
And-
the opposing position gets its
Mm.
kind of, I thought it gets its anchor to be a cognitivist because you need to identify the
yeah,
kind of state that it is, and the
yeah,
cognitive evaluative appraisal can do that. And then the idea is sometimes that because the cognitive appraisal stays constant, the phenomenology can alter, and so it can account for the fact that we all can be grieving, but the phenomenology not be identical, although the object, Motilal's death, for example, is identical and the thing that identifies the
mm,
state. But so now I understand. So the other side you're saying is like, we'll dump the cognitive style
yeah,
and say that there's something like a sufficient similarity relation in the phenomenology
yeah.
of the grief across the people with the appropriate trigger to
Yeah.
isolate it, and then you think you can get like a causal relation for the phenomenology, and that's the thing. Is that where we're
I'm
going?
not sure about the causal part,
But the phenomenology
but the
being-
phenomenology
being essential is
without the sort of heavy Brentano, cognitive
no, not
intentionality
Brentano. I
and
mean
so
just the feelings.
Yeah, just the
what it
feeling,
feels.
yeah.
That's the part you
So
want.
it's sort of psychos phenomenology. I think that's what needs to be done for
Right.
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
That's and in
So
the,
that would explain the difference, though, in your two cases, though. If you like your view, this view about the phenomenology,
Mhm.
I think you can explain the difference between the painting and the words, because the medium is different. So
Mm.
phenomenology should light up. That's why I wanted to add the causal element, because the triggering phenomenon in the poetry is going to be conceptual, but the triggering phenomenon in the art won't be. So the grief that's explained in both cases can be individuated by the phenomenology based on the trigger. Does that make sense?
Phenomenology based on the
The trigger in the case of the words is the words.
Oh,
the trigger in
oh.
the case of the art is the art.
ah
So the phenomenology is going to be
right
different
okay,
for
yeah.
although it's grief, but it's
Yeah.
because of the trigger.
But there are
Yeah.
people in the poetical world who will say the trigger of word is not word.
It's the meaning.
yeah, it's the meaning.
Right, so then in
it's
the art
also
case,
the
it's
rasa and so forth. So
In the art case also, you may say that there are grammars of art, and
Mhm.
a trained artist would experience it differently.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Right. Yes. And yesterday at Cal, there's this guy from UC Davis. I think you probably know him, Clinton Tolley,
Mm-hmm.
doing on Kant on the third critique.
Okay.
I was sort of completely bewildered sitting there.
Oh.
He tried to bring in reason, and everybody gives his judgment, critique of judgment. It's about the judgment and so
Yeah.
forth. No, he's sort of bringing reason all completely back into
The critique of judgment.
the critique of judgment of in the work of art and so
Yeah.
forth. That it really is, it's the work. Otherwise, Aristotle wouldn't make sense. I mean, I don't know where he got that in from, but yeah, it's sort of almost revisionist. And I'm sitting there and I said, but that's not really what Heidegger would say of the work of art and so forth. They were not interested in talking about Heidegger. It's really how you read the third critique, and yet the passages and so on. Most of the Kantians there didn't really go along with it, but some people would sort of say that for art as well, that it's just totally more than cognitive, it's a transcendental Kantian kind of response that you're making. Well, that's what we need to get away from. But on poetry, it's like Bilhan and Bahmana, and there are Dundeen, there are people who have argued about poetry being the really the highest form of art that actually evokes the rasas and so on and so forth. So there's been a lot of debate in the tradition about whether it's poetry, whether it's theatre, or whether it's literature. But they won't say that the trigger of that is just just a cognitive response. All I'm saying is that I take all of what you are saying, but I want to see that in painting as well.
Right. I see it.
Right. So why have you left out the painting? Of course, sculptures they do a lot with, but even sculptures are really to learn abhinayas from, dance forms and so forth. They don't really see the sculptures as work of art.
Okay.
So So, okay, well, the theory is fine. So the phenomenology that they have on text is good. But I'm saying, you know, let's move to paintings as well. And here is a great example of it. And so that's one. But the second thesis of it was to sort of isolate grief from that and pay a little bit more attention. And I don't know, I you know, when I read C.S. Lewis and people like that, I read raw poetry, Edgar Allan Poe and so on, their poems on grief, on lament, Lapa, the Bengali work too, was it Bengali or Sanskrit work? It was Bengali actually, and then he translates it into Sanskrit, this fellow. Moves me very much, and I can see all of that happening. Yeah, so I wouldn't want to sort of causally separate the two. I think I would go along with that, but you know, and Gitanjali has some very moving parts as well. So when he's talking about the death of his father, the death of his wife, death of his daughter, Renuka, there's some amazing parts in that too. So you know, there's a skill in which people can use poetry, literary writing. I mean, you know, I even saw like Irish Murdoch or the the Turkish writer. Yeah, I read some of his stuff. I mean, it's pretty amazing. There's a lot of pretty deep emotion. And Amitav Ghosh does that too, with his writings. It's quite, and Salman Rushdie has too, you know, in Shame, it's in Midnight Children, there's a really very deep emotions about partition that gets across too. So one wouldn't put down the literary stuff, but I think, you know, the visual has it too, visualization, and maybe what we could do though, that the phenomenology of grief is probably best expressed in painting. I mean, that would be a radical thesis to try out, but you know, I mean, I think somebody would knock us down on that, but I don't know. We could try that.
I could share an experience. I got into learning Indian music.
Oh yeah, yes, of course. Tell us more about it. Yeah.
But after going and learning about the different ragas and the different pervading emotions, and I came back and I was hanging out with my jazz musician friends who hadn't really heard of much Indian classical music, and I was really
Despite
curious.
Zakir Hussain.
Yeah, exactly. But I would ask. There was a great recording of Betty Gomla Khan Saab's short 3-minute ragas, really famous recording. And so it goes through about, I think, 10 different ragas, 3 minutes each. And I would play these for these, sometimes trained musicians, sometimes untrained, just Western people, not having any connection to ragas. And I would ask them what emotion they felt. What was did they feel? To me, I had sort of cultured an understanding, because my guru said this raga is more meditative. This raga is, and you learn the Bandish, you learn the Bandish lyrics. So like, a lot of times the main emotion is always depicted in the lyrics. It's always talking about a pain of separation in Todi or something like this. You know? But I would play it, and people, it was a strange result, because across the board, people would hear one raga and said, "Oh, that's it's full of grief and sorrow."
Wow.
Yeah, and then next recording, yeah, it sounds very similar. Like there's like a yearning. There's a yearning and a sorrow in this music. I said, oh, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, well, the next one is Rag Yemen. They're not going to say that.
Yeah.
No, that's very sorrowful. I'm like, really? Next one. Oh, wow, this is it's getting even more sorrowful. And they heard one emotion the whole time.
Wow.
And it made me question the idea of, I had already been trained to identify like a Lydian scale as like Yemen. And that's more like uplifting. It's more meditative. It's less full of grief, right?
Yeah.
But it has a lot to do with what perspective.
The tempo, the separation, the space, maybe.
Yeah, but that actually comes to the same cultural, right? Yeah.
Do you think that holds across the I mean, like, wouldn't you? I feel like people would say like a minor scale still has a certain kind of sense cross-culturally.
Well, that's true, but it's also like.
I mean, I think you're right, there are gonna be examples where like a certain scale structure is gonna be interpreted differently, but
Yeah.
it looks like it can go the other way too for some scale structures.
Yeah.
Like it would be invariant or mostly invariant for some, and
Yeah.
hypervariant in the other cases.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel tempted to share one thing with you that you know that the first minor or next to the first major, the re, the common re. Yeah. So one guy I was talking to, and I said that my most favorite note is that of the first minor.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, that is the saddest note." I said, "Really? Oh, I feel the maximum delight by listening to
Great,
that." And that is the body, the main note for the Raga Bhairava. So that is the Shiva. So I think is that you mentioned, no, that Abhinavadagupta, that all rasas actually end in the Shanti rasa. It is that, I mean, if you see the Shanti, you don't see the sorrow. But if you don't see the Shanti, then you see the sorrow.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
I guess for me, it's like, because Indian music does have a lot of very challenging modes of music, sometimes extremely full of a different type of sorrow that as a Westerner I didn't grow up with, you know. And it was a ballpark. It wasn't like it was always a specific, you know, like Ali Akbar Khan Sahib would go to play a raga, and he'd say the mood of this raga is joy, sorrow, pathos, and pain. And then he'd go to play the raga, and you're like, well, that's everything, you know. So it's like, well, you can bring out those emotions in any mode of music because it's about the intention. But there are definitely ballparks of you know, like you're saying, there's going to be certain flavors that are going to be commonly understood more objectively. But I guess
I wanted, if I may,
Yeah.
I invite everyone to, we can thank our speaker and we can continue to stay and talk if we wish. Yeah? Yeah, just to, you know, because we're at 9 o'clock and we want to release our
Yeah.
guest speaker.
Thank you.
All right.
thank you.
Thank you.